What's a dark family secret you uncovered? My grandpa doesn't know that his dad was hit and killed by a drunk driver. He was like 2 when his dad died and can't remember any of it. The only thing he said was that he thought it involved a truck. I found the article of my great-grandfather's death when I started digging into my grandpa's family tree. I also found that great-grandpa was the result of a teen pregnancy and was raised by his grandparents. I'd tell him, but I'm not really sure there's too much point in bringing it up now. Now let him believe what is always believed. If it's not hurting anyone else, leave sleeping dogs lie. He doesn't know that I bothered to look into his family. He won't talk about it, and I don't want to upset him by asking. I still have a lot of unanswered questions, old Mayo. Great-grandma ran a hotel in the late 1800s near a train depot and army fort in the Oklahoma Territory. Turns out it was a brothel. Great-grandma was a madam. She must have been good at it cause she left a stack to my grandma. Well, you know what they say, location, location, location. Hilarious. So turns out my mother was engaged to a guy. He went on a long family holiday to Europe. When he got back, my mum was with his best friend, my father. With all due respect, that's a violation of bro code. And your life is now forfeit. Culling this person would be righting a wrong. Does the Council of Brothers agree? We are in agreement. Execute the sinner. Agreed, by sinner shall be executed. Can we also vote on this dude? Annoying comment for the sake of karma on a fairly popular subthread aside. Shath. Lmao, Shath, I was half drunk at 3 AM writing this. I agree, I should be executed ASAP. When I was a kid I knew my grandfather was odd. He'd call me his grandson, even when I was wearing a dress and clearly female, but my parents would tell me to ignore it. Then I found out that when my dad was a kid, grandpa sold my dad's sister Barbara to someone and kept my dad and his brother because he didn't want a girl in the family. My dad found his sister Barbara around the time I was in middle school via calling around to get records. They were reunited. She's my favorite aunt now. No one liked grandpa. Good lord. Sold? Think of a time before IVF and other advanced reproductive technologies. And not all adoptions were official. Exactly, this dad was born in the 1940s and was the youngest of the 3 kids. His parents had both lived during the Great Depression. This was just how some things were handled at the time. My brother discovered we had a sister because he was hitting on a girl at the bar and they got to talking about their parents. Turns out we have the same dad. He threatens to kill me whenever I bring it up, lol. Well, at least they figured it out before and not after. I went to HS with 2 people who were banging for a while and ended up having the same dad. No one brings it up. They found out about 5 years after. Who's your daddy? Wait, seriously, mine too. She did ancestry DNA and that's how they found out. She grew up having no idea who her father was and the dad had no clue about her. Sucks when your wild oats start ****king each other. This was on an episode of House. A guy and girl who were neighbors growing up get married and then come down with the same rare disease. It turns out they're half siblings because the guy's dad was cheating with the girl's mom. I can think of 2 off the top of my head. I'm sure there are more I'll think of. My dad's family was messed up. Secret 1, the disabled kid. My dad was pretty open about it, but I know they kept it hush hush within their community. IDK how it, when my dad found out, but he discovered he had an older brother, his parents' oldest child, Ron, if I remember right, named after his dad. When Ron was preschool age they were told he was mentally retarded. Horrified, they turned him over to the state and never spoke of him again. Years later word got back to them that the kid was not in fact mentally disabled. He had auditory dyslexia, now called auditory processing disorder. He grew up to be a fully functioning independent adult. He refused to have any contact with the family when my dad reached out. Totally fair emo. Secret 2, Pedophile. The previously mentioned Ron Sr. who disowned Ron Jr. was a child rapist. When they were grown, my dad and his younger brother learned that their father had raped their sister on multiple occasions and threatened her to keep her quiet. She didn't tell anyone until long after it all happened. Later she reconnected with her father and allowed him to meet and spend time with her children. Edit. Almost forgot. They found out after their mom died that apparently the youngest brother had a different father than the other 3 kids. IDK if they ever discovered the story behind that one. Before my granddad committed suicide, he was planning to kill every single family member in the house. Grandmom, my mom, my aunt, 2 uncles, few more people. Edit with more details. He had left a detailed suicide note blaming everyone for his death and his intention to kill all. Family speculation is that it was due to some extramarital affair he had and how the family was obstructing his path. My mom's family is still traumatized by this entire episode and no one likes to talk about it. I guess that trauma of waking up one day and learning that your dad, who just committed suicide, was also planning to kill all of you, is impossible to shake off in a lifetime. How did they know that? He had left a detailed suicide note blaming entire family for his own suicide and how he had planned to off them all. Fortunately he did that murder-suicide in reverse order. I want to make a dyslexia saves the day joke, but it feels really insensitive. I was the family secret. My biological parents started having kids as teenagers. For context, when my biological mom found out she was pregnant with me, she was 21, and I was their 4th child. They quickly realized they needed to get their act together. They were already struggling financially, had countless drug issues, etc. They decided that they were going to put me up for adoption. I was a baby. I was adopted by a loving family quite quickly, only about an hour drive from the city I was born in. Coincidentally, I ended up returning to that same city for college. My sophomore year, I decided to seek out my biological family. Turns out, my biological parents separated right after I was born. My biological mom is still in and out of jail to this day, but my biological dad was able to start a new chapter. He got clean and sober, remarried, started going to church, and built a legitimate career for himself. He told his new wife about me when they first met, but didn't tell any of his children. My other siblings didn't know I existed. Thanks to the internet, I ended up tracking down his work number and gave him a call. Later on, he said as soon as I said, "Hi, this might be really weird," but he knew it was me. Apparently, ever since I turned 18, him and his wife were waiting anxiously for me to resurface. They knew the day would come eventually. That evening, they sat my siblings down and told them about me. It was difficult at first, but now I'm 25 and me and him have a pretty solid relationship. That's amazing story. I'm happy for you. Well, dad's a pedophile and my brother and I were the secret in my mom's family for a while. I imagine that was a fun conversation for her to have, explaining to our half-siblings that hey, you have these older siblings, because I used to be married to a piece of shit, and then I abandoned them, because I'm also a piece of shit. *ITTY parents. I don't like your parents. I'm so sorry. That sounds horrible. I'm sorry. Nobody should ever grow up thinking, or being led to feel like, they were a mistake. All babies are miracles and you are a miracle. The people who made you certainly seem shitty, but I hope you've both found support systems who can show you that not everyone is a terrible piece of shit. I tell my kids way too many times a day that I love them, because I don't ever want them to doubt that they are safe and loved. I even made a song about them being safe and loved. It may sound cheesy, but I grew up in a home where I knew I was safe and mostly knew that I was loved, but my parents weren't really good at showing it or expressing it, so I made a promise that I would do better for my kids. I'll probably fuck up in so many other ways, but at least they'll know they are loved. My dad tried to run out on my mum while she was pregnant with me because he'd been embezzling money from a photography club at his workplace, then a government institution where he'd been treasurer. It was all about to come out because the club needed the money, so my dad decided to cut and run. My mother's brother and father caught him by pure accident as he was leaving the house, and my granddad, a burly Scots coal miner, got him by the throat and told him if he ever pulled a stunt like that again he'd be dead. My dad, according to the story, wet himself right there. My granddad paid the money back to the club so that no one found out, as not only would my dad have lost his job, he'd most likely have been jailed too. My mum though could never trust him with money again, and so, although they had a joint bank account, she had them limit his access and made a separate account to control the bills, etc. She went back to work so she could always support herself, which in those days in rural Scotland was really uncommon. In that area, most women were stay-at-home mums. So, there was no such thing as childcare for under 4s. Mum went back to her job as a primary school teacher, and I spent the first few years of my life sleeping in a basket in the stationery cupboard in her classroom. At Mum's funeral, some of her former colleagues were still coming up to me, saying, "Oh, it's the baby in the cupboard. What was/is your relationship with your father? What were your uncle and grandpa like, and are you close with them? Where are you in life now?" This is a very exciting and beautiful story of motherhood. And the idea of your mom keeping you sleeping in a basket by her side in rural Scotland sounds so sweet, and I'm totally romanticizing it. Sorry, but also kinda not sorry. I dunno. She sounds awesome. I actually stay with my father now because of circumstances, but no one in the family trusts him to this day. He was brought up as the golden boy, the only child in the family, and spoiled by his parents basically to keep him away from them while they both went about their respective extramarital affairs. So he thinks he's amazing and always thought he was really clever, which he isn't, and that's how he always got caught whenever he tried to be sneaky. Luckily my mother was properly able to stand up for herself and never let him bully her, no matter how much he tried throughout the marriage. He tried to get violent and my mum basically told him that he'd hit her once, but at some point he'd have to sleep, and when he did, she'd break his hands with the fire irons. He wasn't as bad then, but he still has that kind of pent-up resentment of everyone, because he thinks he's better than everyone else, but has never achieved anything, and has no respect from anyone. He loses his temper at absolutely nothing, so it's kind of a constant struggle to deal with him, which isn't helped because I have severe anxiety and depression, which he tries at times deliberately to exacerbate. My granddad is gone now, but he used to take care of me a lot when I was young, but too old for the cupboard. He would collect me from nursery and babysit me until mum got finished at her school. My uncle lived with him and still lives in the cottage today. He's become obsessed with his health though now and is constantly trying to convince everyone he's ill, keeps admitting himself to hospital when there's nothing wrong with him besides the fact that he's clinically obese. So I spend a lot of time now looking after him as well. God, I never realized just how screwed up my family is until I actually started typing this. Everyone interesting is screwed up. Phahaha, thank you for responding. I don't really know how to respond other than to say that it sounds like your mom totally made you into a badass and a good person, and that I hope the people in your life smarten up, but even if they don't, things will sort themselves out. Again, thanks for your reply. I found out a couple of years ago my uncle on my father's side is a pedophile. He and his wife were staying at my grandmother's house taking care of her while she was going in and out of hospitals and rehab. We stayed at that house with them for a year without knowing. The house used to be a hub for our family get-togethers, but when he moved in, less and less family showed up, and we moved festivities to my aunt's. A lot of the time this uncle wouldn't come to these either. On top of this, we knew he wasn't allowed to keep his granddaughter he had guardianship over because he was an alcoholic and prone to violent acts and EUIs, so we kind of assumed this is why he was estranged. The year my granny died our father told my sister and I the reason he couldn't see her was because she had filed against him for molestation. This was a shock to us considering we had been staying with this man for years and we really liked him, but knowing this it's really hard to even want to be around him. sadly, but thankfully, we don't go to as much anymore, so it's not really a problem. Why would your dad endanger you and your sister like that? I don't think he saw it like that. Maybe he felt he'd be able to step in. Maybe he didn't think at all. I'm sure he was just thinking about his mother in her final days. My granny really loved us and appreciated our company since people weren't coming around as much, so I think that was his priority. I suspect he had a quiet chat with his brother potential consequences of potential actions. My cousin didn't leave the family for 10 years because of her parents' divorce, like my parents said. She left the family for 10 years because she and her dad got into an argument and he physically shoved her into a basement, locked her inside, and refused to let her out. He eventually got charged with DV and she left the family because too many people were blaming her for getting her dad arrested. Edit. I need to clarify, because I'm realizing I worded this poorly. My cousin wasn't locked in the basement for 10 years. She was pissed that her dad locked her up and that the family sided with him, and she stopped talking to everyone for 10 years. She was in the basement for a few hours, as I understand it. I hope your cousin is okay now. She is. She's married to a really nice guy and has 2 kids who she adores. This all happened about 20 years ago, and she's doing really good now. I'm glad to hear it. It really sounds like she deserves it, too. Sucks that happened to her, but it's probably for the best. Learned all she needed to about the people around her, and she, hopefully, didn't get too hurt. Physically, anyway. Emotionally it probably fucked her up more than a bit, at least for a while. My one cool uncle came to our house every Christmas. Thanksgiving was always really great and pleasant. Had a bunch of cats and dogs at his house. Was married to my aunt shortly before I was born. So one day my mom and I went to visit him and my aunt at his house, and there's this girl there. I think she was a year older than me, so about 15. My mom and I are like, "Who's this girl?" And my uncle is like, "Well, I just found out a few days ago that I have a daughter, so I guess this is your cousin." Turns out that before my uncle and aunt got married, my uncle had a pretty wild bachelor party in which a prostitute was hired. One thing led to another, and my cousin appears 15 years later to find her father. She was so sweet, and my uncle was actually really good about the whole situation. He even started paying child support to my cousin's mom, his idea. My aunt was also very forgiving. I've never met my cousin's mom. That had a surprisingly wholesome ending. For a change of pace, might I add, these threads have been quite dark. Oh boy, here we go. My family could have been worth millions. My grandpa's father, my great-grandfather, had built a company from the ground up called Johnson Corrugated. We made corrugated cardboard for shipping boxes. Great-grandfather was a major dick, but had built the family empire, so we still see him in a good way. My grandfather was supposed to inherit the company 30-something years ago, until Uncle Randy happened. My great-grandmother was still alive, and was technically owner of the company. She was also blind and deaf. Uncle Randy comes in impersonating my grandfather, and has her sign away the entire company over to him. He gives half of the $15 million to his son, who flees to Europe after the death threats. Randy dies within the month, after fleeing the family from cancer. Nobody went to his funeral, and we piss on his grave. Note, my grandpa is 80 and can't retire, because he's been fighting this in court for the past 20 years and owes about $300,000 in legal fees. Fuck Randy, I found this out after stumbling into a stack of legal documents in my grandpa's attic. We still don't know where Randy's son is to this day. Hey, I'm in a similar boat. My great-grandfather hit a big oil type situation and got a few million around the Great Depression era. His kids pissed it all away trying to make their own movie companies and other businesses that never worked. Basically buying themselves a job and running it into the ground with their ideas. My mom got like $200k when my grandpa died like 10 years ago. That was the last of it.
3, 2, 1.